Hey dudes, welcome to Splat from the Past, the only 80s themed horror and sci-fi show where things can get totally radical. Now today is just an absolute dream of a show because I am interviewing the first ever live action Spider-Man, Nicholas Hammond. Yes, Nicholas Hammond is coming on the podcast today. And for those of you that don't know, Nicholas started acting very young as a child. He was the Von Trapp's son in The Sound of Music with Julie Andrews. And he later played Doug Simpson, the big man on campus, on the Brady Bunch when Marcia gets hit in the face with a football. And currently he's playing Sam Wanamaker in Quentin Tarantino's brand new classic movie, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And I'm just so honored and just humbled that I'm having Nicholas Hammond on the show today. He is a truly great actor and just great screen presence. And I've always wanted to talk to him. And I am just the luckiest fanboy in the whole wide world right now. So yeah, here is my interview with Nicholas Hammond. Hey, Nicholas.
Hello. Hey, how's it going?
It's going great. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm sorry this took a little while to organize. It's always a bit tricky with the time change and everything.
Oh, yeah, and it's also difficult to call Australia sometimes, too.
Yeah, I know. Well, thank you for calling, and I hope you get something that's useful for you.
Oh, thank you so much. This is such an honor and a dream. I thank you so much for this.
It's my pleasure.
So, going back in time, I was reading you moved around a lot as a kid because your father was in the military and that your mother, the actress Eileen Bennett, she took you to see My Fair Lady and that made you want to become an actor.
That's absolutely right. Good for you for having uncovered that. That is true. We were passing through London. My father was between postings. We'd been in Paris for a number of years, and he was going back to the Pentagon in Washington. But we were in transit. We only had one night in London. And because my mother is English and because in the theater herself, I'd always been quite interested, even as a little boy, hearing her stories about what that was like, what London was like, and what the theater in London was like. So we went down to look to see if we could get into something, and we saw this big line of people waiting for canceled tickets outside My Fair Lady, and my mother went up and asked, and they said tonight is the last performance ever of Julie Andrews and Rex Harrison together in the show. And that's why everybody was lined up trying to get in. And we got 2 seats right from back, and that was the first play I ever saw. And I thought, I love this. This is what I want to do. Of course, I didn't realize then that 4 years later I'd be at 20th Century Fox with Julie playing my governess.
Yeah, did you tell her about that?
Oh, yeah, I've told her the story, and we love that story. We talk about it a lot every time I see her.
Wow. And did your mother instill in you a love of acting?
Well, she did and she didn't. I mean, she never has encouraged me to be an actor, but I think just by her own example and the sort of friends she had who were actors and actresses, and especially as a little boy, they just seemed like this really magical, special group of people. They were always laughing, and they had stories to tell, and they were interesting. And I think there was just something about that world that as a child, I just thought I would love to be a part of that world. I want to do what those people do, and I want to kind of live in the place those people live. I mean, of course, as a child, you don't know all the ups and downs and all the hardships and all the times where you might hit disappointments in the business. To me, all I saw was what looked like a really, really fun way to earn a living. Mm-hmm. And I got to say, I still think it's true. It is a thing.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So you made your Broadway debut at age 11 in The Complacent Lover, and
Yeah.
you got to work with Gene Wilder before he was Gene Wilder. What was he like?
Well, he was wonderful. As a matter of fact, actually, there were three of us in that show where it was our first show. There was an actress named Sandy Dennis,
Right?
and Gene Wilder and myself. And we were, all three of us were novices on Broadway. It was our Broadway debut. Of course, I was only 11, and they were, I mean, they'd already done work, you know, off-Broadway work and fringe theater work and stuff like that. But this was a big deal for the three of us. And Gene was wonderful. I not only did the show with him there, but I also did it on tour with him. And I remember, you know, we stayed, my mother and I and Gene Wilder and his wife, we often stayed in the same sort of theatrical boarding houses, which back in those days, when so many shows toured and did summer stock and that kind of thing, every town had a list of places for actors to stay, which were basically kind of like the equivalent to bed and breakfast. And it was really fun because, again, as a child, you know, sometimes you'd go into these places, and if there were 3 or 4 different shows on in town, or maybe there was the ballet, or maybe there was the, you know, Ice Capades or something, and you'd have performers from all these different shows all staying at the same hotel, and, you know, coming home after the show and talking about how it had gone for them and what their audience had been like. And again, you know, it was, and Gene was a part of all that. And he used to play catch with me during the day. We had baseball mitts and we had baseball. And, you know, Tommy, it was just one of those things where, again, he was one of the examples I was given as a little boy that, you know, there's some wonderful people who work in this business.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there is. And if you're lucky, you meet a lot of them.
I have. I've just had the most wonderfully fortunate career. You know, without jumping around too much, but, you know, I was just thinking about it the other day. Well, it was actually pointed out to me by Quentin Tarantino, where he said, you know, how many people can say they got their start in Peter Brook's Lord of the Flies, then they did The Sound of Music, and then they did a Quentin Tarantino movie. And, you know, and it's true. I mean, I feel like those are 3 pieces of work that I was lucky to be a part of that I think will kind of exist forever. And, you know, how fortunate was I that, you know, going from the age of 11 to the age of, you know, 67,
Right.
I was able to keep working and have those kinds of experiences with brilliant artists like Quentin and Robert Wise and Peter Brook. You know, so yeah, I've had a very, very lucky career. I'm grateful for it.
That is just wonderful. Then a couple years later, you got cast in the immortal classic, The Sound of Music. And I can imagine that must have been a very intense, long, but by the end of the day, it was a very rewarding shoot.
Oh yeah, I think those adjectives are exactly the right ones. It was long, it was tiring. We fought a lot of very bad weather, and of course you're dealing with children, and some of them very, very young children, 5 years old, 6 years old. It's not easy getting kids that age to all be kind of focused and you know, doing what they're meant to do. I mean, they were a great group of kids. They're still my friends today, but you know, they were children, and I think it was a long shoot. I think a lot of the difficulties were kept hidden from us that we didn't find out till afterwards. But ultimately, hugely rewarding. And of course, the real benefit, more than anything, was to see the joy and the happiness that it has brought to so many people over the entire world for so many years, and continues to do so to this day. And I think every one of us, you know, from Julie Andrews on down, associated with that film, feels incredibly lucky to have been a part of it.
Yeah, I mean, that movie gets played every Easter to this day, just as much as the Ten Commandments.
know, and it's kind of a ritual around the world, even in places I was in Shanghai, and Tokyo, and places like that. And as soon as they find out that you were Friedrich von Trapp in The Sound of Music, that's all they want to talk about. They don't care about anything else you might have done. They don't care about, who you are, or where you live. They just want to hear about being in The Sound of Music. And that's kind of a wonderful thing. And, people often, when they want to talk about it, they will start by saying, oh, you must be so sick of being asked this. And I always say, no, I will never get sick of being asked about that film. I am so happy and proud to have been in it. And I'm particularly pleased about the fact that I had a small part in something that as I say, has made a difference in the lives of literally billions of people now around the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my high school did a production of it, and I auditioned for it. I didn't get it, though, because I can't sing and dance.
Well, those are two things that kind of are a little bit necessary, particularly in the stage production. Tommy, what role did you audition for?
Nothing in particular. They just had me go in there. I did some
general audition.
I just did some sheet music, and that was that. And I just couldn't keep up with the dancing, the choreography that they were doing for the audition. So it's
scary. I know. I agree with you. I find dance auditions back in the day when I used to do them. I find dance auditions the most terrifying because, real professional dancers, to them it's just like it's shorthand and it's easy and they only have to see it once and they can do it. And I felt like I'd suddenly entered some planet where everybody else, had feet that worked and I didn't. But, I just had to persevere and drill and drill and drill. And we had a very, very patient choreographer. So you have my full sympathy and support with that. I understand that feeling.
Thank you. And you certainly did persevere. How was Robert Wise as a director?
Well, he was great. And as I say, it was only when I really got to be older and started playing roles where I had children of my own as playing my kids in various shows and realizing the challenges it can be working with particularly very small children, that I realized what an extraordinary thing he had actually accomplished by getting the seven of us to work in such a kind of tight and harmonious way, and where I think, and it seems to be borne out by, people's reaction to the film, that he had cast seven children from different parts of the world, but who you really believed were all part of a family and were all brothers and sisters. And he managed to create that unity between us. And plus, of course, he was just one of the great Hollywood directors. I mean, his skill as a director was enormous. I mean, I was lucky that I was old enough, and I had just seen West Side Story before we did the movie. So I was more aware of who Robert Wise was than probably a lot of the kids were. And, of course, I loved West Side Story, and I just thought it was brilliant. And so I knew going in that I was working with a great, great director. And so, yeah, I mean, I was in awe of him. He was a very quiet man. He was very soft-spoken. Mm-hmm. He never raised his voice. He was not one of those directors who felt the need to shout and swagger and prove to everybody that he was the boss. Everybody knew he was the boss. And he could just very quietly whisper a little something in your ear or very quietly speak to the whole group, and everybody would lean in to listen to him. Mm-hmm. He didn't shout at you. We always thought, that's a great technique, and it's something that really good directors know how to do. It's only the second-rate directors who feel the need to kind of swagger around and try to convince you how important they are. And so I had some very good role models when I was a boy, actors like Walter Pidgeon, who played my father several times, and, of course, Julie, more than anyone, as an example of how to behave if you're the star of the film. So I was, again, I've had a very fortunate life.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And we just lost Heather Menzies a few years ago. I reached out
We
to
did. Christmas Eve a couple of years ago, which was terribly sad. Very, very sad. Heather was a very, very close friend of mine, one of my closest friends in the world, and I spoke to her right up until a day or two before she passed away. And terribly sad and very sudden and shocking. And I think all the rest of us, the five of us that remain, I think still are kind of in disbelief. With Charmian, it wasn't quite so much of a surprise because we knew Charmian had not been well for some time, and she had a rather slow, and again, extremely sad decline. But in a way, when Charmian died, it was almost a release for her from the suffering she was going through. But with Heather, it just came out of the blue, and it was just awful. So, so we've lost two of them now, which is a great sadness to the rest of us, because there was a bond between us that we had, that we were the only ones in the world, and we remain the only ones in the world who know what it was like to be a Von Trapp child in that film. And that's something that we will always share. So I just hope the rest of them stay well and healthy for a very long time.
Yeah, I'd reached out to Heather a couple months before she passed, and I never heard back from her. I was a big fan of her and her husband, Robert Urich.
Yes, well, they were great people, both of them. And, she was the person who would respond. So I can only assume that by the time you were getting in touch with her, she probably wasn't particularly well.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
Yeah, but she was a great girl, Heather. I mean, she was brave, and she was funny, and she was very generous, and she had a wonderful heart. So we miss her deeply.
Mm-hmm. So after The Sound of Music, did you decide that you were going to finish school and then pursue acting full time after you graduated?
Well, yes and no. I did. Yes, I did want to finish school. I knew I wanted to go to college. I didn't quite know why I wanted to go to college, but I just thought it would be a good idea to get a bit of an education under my belt. I did continue to work through my school years. I did summer stock plays in the summer. I did television shows up in New York. Mm-hmm. And I continued to keep my hand in as an actor as much as I could, balance it between my schoolwork and doing that. So I would say I was a part-time actor through my high school years. And then I made a decision, which was actually a good decision, that my agent recommended I do. I was with the William Morris Agency, and he said, look, Nicholas, he said, you're a very famous child actor, but if you don't want to be known as a child actor all your life, he said, I suggest you go away, go to college, get your degree, and come back as an adult, and then be an adult actor, and just start over as an adult, and not try to trade on your reputation as a child. And one of his clients was a wonderful actress, Patty Duke.
Right.
And that was the advice he had given Patty. And I was a huge admirer of Patty Duke. As a child, I'd seen her in The Miracle Worker, and I thought she was just one of the best actresses around. And so I thought, well, if it's good enough for Patty Duke, it's good enough for me. So that is exactly what I did. I went to Princeton. I got my degree from Princeton. And then, as luck would have it, within a couple of days of graduating, I got offered a film at MGM with Charlton Heston, and so I flew out to California, and I did just what he said. I went into that film as an adult, as a grown-up actor. Susan Day played my girlfriend, and again, Walter Pitchen was my father, and it was a movie called Skyjacked.
Yep.
And that sort of started my career as an adult actor in Hollywood. So I made the break, so I didn't try to just kind of trade off the work I'd done as a child. I thought, I'm not even going to mention that when I go into an audition or when I have a meeting or when I'm on the set. I just want to be accepted as somebody who now is, 22 years old and here working as a grown-up in Hollywood.
Yeah, Skyjacked was the beginning of the all-star disaster flicks that came out in the 70s.
It totally was. It started them, and the director, John Gillerman, went on to become quite famous for doing those. He did Towering Inferno. He did Death on the Nile.
King Kong.
I beg your pardon?
He did the King Kong remake.
That's right. That's right. He did indeed. So he, it was. And it was also fascinating for me because I loved reading stories about old Hollywood in the 30s and the 40s.
Oh, yeah.
And the MGM studios where we shot Skyjacked, it's still at that point, which of course is Sony today, but at that point it was still virtually untouched. I mean, I remember days where Walter Pidgeon and I would walk to lunch at the MGM commissary, and he would point out little buildings, and he would say, "Oh, there's Spencer Tracy's dressing room, and that's Katharine Hepburn, where the ladies' gym where she used to go and work out." And I just loved hearing all that. You know, it was a connection to the old Hollywood that didn't exist anymore. So I really felt very lucky that I had a couple of opportunities with Sound of Music at 20th Century Fox, and then with Skyjacked, to be on those wonderful classical old Hollywood film lots that were still as they had been, you know, back in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. I mean, when I was at Fox doing Sound of Music, I sat in the schoolroom at the same desk where Shirley Temple had sat. You know, those things were still there. It was all still intact. And that was a marvelous thing.
Mm-hmm. Did Walter Pidgeon mentor you?
He did. In many ways, he kind of was a role model for me. And I kept thinking, this is the sort of career I would like to have. I don't care. You know, Walter Pidgeon was never Clark Gable. He was never the biggest star at the studio.
Yeah.
But he was a consistent, solid, working actor who had an excellent reputation, who was very well liked by everybody, whose work was very, very good. You know, you look at films like Mrs. Miniver and How Green Was My Valley, and he's marvelous in those movies.
Oh, yeah.
And Walter was very happy being right there in that level. He was also a gentleman, Walter. He was a kind, gracious man. He had style. He had what today we would call class. And he was kind and gracious to everybody, you know, whether it was the extra on the set or whether it's Charlton Heston. You know, he had no difference in his attitude. And he did. He took me under his wing. I first did a play with him called The Complacent Lover when I was about 12. Then I did another play with him called The Happiest Millionaire. I think I might have been 15 or 16. I think I was 16. And then, of course, I was lucky enough to do Skyjacked with him. So I worked 3 times with him, and really we stayed friends until he passed away. I used to go to his house in Bel Air, and, you know, and he'd give me advice. He'd known my father, because my father had visited us when we were on tour, and he liked my father enormously because he had great respect for the military, and he had great respect for men who served and dedicated their lives to service, which my father did. And he knew my father had died when I was still quite young, so at 18. So when we saw each other when I was 22 doing Skyjacked, I think he really felt, you know, he sort of became like an honorary uncle, and I felt lucky to have him. And he often spoke of my father, and he often spoke about what a wonderful man he thought my father was. And that meant the world to me, as you can imagine.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. I mean, Walter Pidgeon was one of those guys like Robert Ryan or James Mason who could play the lead or the villain or the supporting friend or something. I mean, he was just a Renaissance man. He was.
He was in everything. And he also had a very good voice. He could sing very well. I hadn't realized until recently that he'd done a musical on Broadway with Jackie Gleason. He did a show called Take Me Away. And you know, and I heard the soundtrack to it, and there he is singing away and, you know, sounding great. So he was a very talented man. He loved poetry. He told me, never go to sleep at night before you've learned 2 lines of poetry. He said it's the best exercise for the brain and for the memory you can do. And he said a lot of actors live in terror of the day where they will no longer be able to remember lines. And he said you'll never have that problem if you exercise your memory muscle and learn 2 lines of poetry every night. And, for a long time, I actually did that, and it was great, and I can still remember many of the poems. He could recite from memory, just pages and pages of Shakespeare, of poems. I mean, he was amazing, just amazing.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting
so,
advice.
Yes,
too.
one of the great influences on my life.
Mm-hmm. And then you played a role that I'm sure you get asked about a lot. It's become somewhat of iconic. Doug Simpson on the Brady Bunch.
I know. Wasn't that funny?
Yeah.
It's funny how sometimes you do these jobs that at the time you think, oh, well, that'll be a fun job for a week and I'll make a little money and that'll be the end of that. And then you have no idea. I'm sure, Maureen and Barry and the rest of us who were in that episode, none of us, of course, had any idea that for some strange reason the Doug Simpson episode would become kind of like the Brady Bunch episode that, they did a Broadway play based on that. Our subject was noses on that episode. Some guy who played Doug Simpson on Broadway. I mean, it was amazing. It was just amazing, and you're right. I once in a blue moon, I'll because I enjoy meeting people who enjoy my work. So once in a blue moon, I'll do a Comic-Con. I'm doing this one called Mega Fest outside of Boston in November, and it's strange because I always think people are going to want to come up and talk about The Sound of Music or talk about Spider-Man or maybe now talk about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But I'm telling you, every third person that will come up and ask for an autograph will say, you were Doug Simpson in the Brady Bunch. Yeah. Yes, I know. Well, and again, what a thrill. How wonderful for me to be in a show that everybody loves so much.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw the 1995 Brady Bunch movie, but they had a guy play Doug Simpson in that. He was probably like, 18, 19, 20-year-old guy playing him and stuff. He looked like you a little bit, but he had an alpha male arrogance about him that the Doug Simpson you played didn't have,
No, because I didn't think there's nothing actually wrong with Doug Simpson. I mean, the thing was, is I keep pointing out to people, yeah, he does dump Marcia when she, breaks her nose, but let's remember Marcia dumped the other guy first. I mean, she wouldn't have been available. When Doug Simpson first said, do you want to go to the dance? Marcia could have said, no, I can't because I'm going with this other guy. And instead, she said, yeah, I'd love to. So, I keep thinking Doug and saying, he wasn't like this terrible guy. I mean, he didn't know. He asked a pretty girl to the dance. She said yes. What's the problem? So, yeah. So I didn't see a need to play him as somebody who was kind of like an arrogant jerk.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
But that's just me. But, yeah, it was funny. Well, I know, and to this day, it is something people seem to somehow of that episode.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, when we did the Brady Bunch, like so many things, it's like when we did Sound of Music. When you're actually there on the soundstage filming it, you're not really aware that it's going to have this huge impact culturally on so many people around the world. I felt the same when I did the Waltons with Sissy Spacek. And when you're actually shooting it, to you it's just another job. It's only later that you realize the Waltons becomes kind of like, the number one show in America and is adored and people love all the characters and they love the family on that show. And, but when you're actually doing the work, you kind of put all that out of your mind. You don't sit there and say, oh, I'm doing something that's going to be seen by 200 million people. I don't think you can do that. I think you just have to focus on what you're doing and the people you're there in the room with and telling the truth with the character you're playing.
Yeah, and then you have to watch the final product later, and then that's when you get the reaction from the audience.
That's right. But you can't stop start thinking about that ahead of time. I always say, I speak sometimes at drama schools, and I always say it's like when you're the batter in a baseball game, you can't walk up to the plate and say, oh, gee, it's going to be great later when people congratulate me for hitting the home run I'm about to hit. You start doing that, and you're going to strike out. I mean, what you have to do is just walk up to that plate, clear your mind, and just concentrate on the ball the pitcher's throwing at you and not think about anything else. And that's kind of what it is when you're working as an actor. Get all that other junk out of your mind. Get all, will this make me famous? Will this be successful? Will millions of people see me in this? Forget all that. Just think about where you are at that moment and who you're dealing with in the reality of that moment.
Yeah, be present in the room.
That's right. That's exactly right. Be present in the room and tell the truth.
Now, how did you get so lucky into being cast as Spider-Man?
Again, an amazing sort of coincidence. The last thing in the world, if someone had come up to me the week before and said, do you think you'll ever play a superhero someday? I would have just laughed in their face and said, that is the last thing in the world anybody would ever ask me to do, and I wouldn't have a clue how to go about doing it. But I was doing a play. I was in L.A., and I was at the Mark Taper Forum at the Center Theater Group in L.A., and I was kind of a member of their little resident company. I'd done a number of plays for them, and I was in a play by an English playwright, Tom Stoppard, and unbeknownst to me, but a couple of the CBS executives who had been looking around for someone to play Peter Parker, they saw me in the play. And I got a phone call from my agent, and they wanted to meet me. And when I went in, I knew so little about the character that when my agent said, oh, they're interested you in the role of a guy named Peter Parker, I didn't know Peter Parker was also Spider-Man. I thought, oh, Peter Parker must be like a friend or something.
Yeah.
So when I went in there, and then they said, and when it dawned on me, and I said, well, I'm not like some muscle-bound, gym guy. I'm not Arnold Schwarzenegger. I don't know. And they said, no. We don't care about any of that. They said, we want the audience to believe this is a real person. We want them to forget that he has superpowers. In the scenes where Peter is just going about his life, at his school, at his job at the newspaper, with his girlfriend, we just want them to think we're watching a show about a normal guy who goes to college and has a part-time job. So it then comes as a sort of a surprise when he puts the suit on and they kind of go, oh, that's right, he does this too. So we want a guy who is just totally real and believable. We don't want a rock who stands there, And so I said, oh, well, that sounds kind of interesting. And I said, the idea of playing a completely believable superhero, not a cartoon character. Because remember, at the time we did it, I mean, really, the only other show like this that had been on was Batman, that had been on years before, which was played as a cartoon, and which was played for jokes, and where it was kind of like, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, we're all being a bit silly here.
Yeah.
And as soon as they made it clear to me, no. And in fact, and I know this is controversial to this day about the decision they made to do this, but I for one, thought it was a good one. They said, in fact, there will be nothing other than Peter's abilities. There will be nothing in this show that is not real. They said, we're not going to have, cartoon supervillains.
Yeah.
We're not going to have people like the Joe. We're going to have real, adversaries who are going to be drug dealers and smugglers and kidnappers and criminals. Peter will be going after real life human being criminals. And so they said he's not going after the Joker. He's not going after, creatures from other planets.
Yeah.
So the more they talked to me about that, the more I thought, I've played so many other kinds of roles at this point. This is a challenge. I mean, if I can convince an audience in a show like this that I am a real human being and just like them and no different from them. I said, I think that'll be very, except for the fact that he had this thing thrust upon him. It wasn't something he wanted. I said, I thought that would be really a fascinating thing to do. Mm-hmm. So that's what I did. That's the way I played it. And I loved every minute of it. I loved every, and again, it's another one that to this day, I'm thrilled that so many people, including Quentin Tarantino, tell me that they're great fans of that series. So it was a wonderful opportunity for me to do something I probably never in a million years would have otherwise done.
Yeah, I like that decision, too, because the show kind of comes off as a 70s crime drama version of Spider-Man, and it's not overly campy like Batman or even Shazam, which was also on at that time.
Well, that's exactly the idea. That was precisely the idea. I mean, it was for two reasons, I think. For one, because they did want to do that. They wanted to do it like a crime drama. And also, budget-wise, back in those days, they just didn't have the technology, and we didn't have the time and the money that you would have to invest to do it properly with real, proper superhero villains, Mm-hmm. I mean, that required an enormous amount of technology, as we know, by the time we got to the Spider-Man films in the, of the current franchise. Fine, if you have $30 million and all the CGI technology of today, you can do whatever you want. But in our day, we were cranking out a show every 7 days on a CBS series budget. So, it just made more sense to do it in a realistic way than to try to do it in sort of fantastic way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you'll get a kick out of this. When I was a kid in the late 80s, early 90s, there was 3 90-minute episodes that were at the local video stores. The Pilot, The Deadly Dust, and The Chinese Web. And my video store in my neighborhood had The Deadly Dust, and that episode to this day is still my favorite episode, and I used to rent it like twice a month for like 2 years until the tape wore out.
Oh, isn't that great? Well, it's interesting because that they would have those 3, because those were the 3 that were released theatrically in movie theaters around the world.
Right.
Outside of the United States, my series wasn't a series. It was a series of 3 Spider-Man movies. And they had 35 millimeter film cams with those 3 in it. So, it makes sense that even though for reasons no one can understand, there's never been a DVD of the series, but those 3 came out on video because they were feature films.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. They were released like...
Well, I'm glad you liked it. I personally love The Chinese Web, and that's largely because I had a wonderful time in Hong Kong, and Rosalind Chow, who played the girl in it, to this day is a friend of mine. And so that's got a lot of happy memories for me. I mean, The Pilot was great, too. Shooting in New York was wonderful.
Yeah. But I like what I like about The Deadly Dust is your chemistry with Joanna Cameron is magical, and it boggles my mind why they didn't make her a regular on the show.
Well, it's very interesting you would say that, because I think Joanna would have been very happy to be one, and she and I talked about it. Mm-hmm. She would have been wonderful. And of course, she'd done her ISIS series, where she played ISIS. So it would have been such a logical thing to bring her on. And she's a very professional girl. I mean, she really knew her stuff, Joanna. And she was a name, and she would have been a big asset to it. We talked about it. We used to talk about it at lunch. But, if you try to understand all the decisions of network executives, that's a road to madness.
Oh, yeah. They're not qualified to make those decisions.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, Ellen Bree came on the show next, and she was very good. I'm actually having her on at the end of the month.
Oh, well, keep her my love, would you?
Oh, I will. Absolutely.
Please do, because, look, Ellen had a tough thing to do, because it's never easy to join a show where everybody else has already bonded and has worked together for a long time. And Ellen came right in and hit the ground running, and she was lovely on it. She really was. She was very good. I was always sorry that we got canceled before Ellen really got a chance to sort of have an episode of her own or something that could really show what she could do. Because I remember when they were auditioning for that role, and I went in and to do the screen tests with the final 2 or 3, and there was no question that Ellen was by far the best one.
Mm-hmm. And what was Robert Alda like to play the bad guy?
Well, he was lovely. In fact, he was very much of the kind of Walter Pidgeon school. You know, he was of that era. Mm-hmm. And he was, you know, he was great because here he was. He'd been a big star himself, you know, years before, and he was coming in as a guest on someone else's show, and yet he did it terribly well. He did it terribly well. I must say, I always felt badly that the only kind of stunt mistake, well, it wasn't even a stunt mistake, but there was one moment in the show where I seem to remember I have to either slam him up against a wall or punch him or something. And normally when you do these things, you know, it's all done carefully with the stunt coordinator to make sure no one will get hurt. And something went wrong. Either he slipped or I slipped. And I remember when I hit him or when I pushed him, I mean, it really knocked him. And I was afraid I'd knocked him out. But, you know, to his credit, he went, no, I'm okay. And at the time, I just felt dreadful because, you know, I thought, oh, my God, you know, this wonderful actor and this older man, and here I am, and now I've just injured him. But so I remember that very well. But I love the fact that he dressed where his clothes matched the color of his hair. Mm-hmm. He was in white, and he had that wonderful white hair. And which, of course, now his son is getting.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. Two of my favorite parts in that episode is when Lawrence Casey, who played the right-hand man, when Spider-Man pushes him into the water, there's this shot of Joanna having this childlike smile on her face. That's just so adorable. And then... Yes,
I remember that.
Yeah, and then... long before that, you two are in this recording studio, and there's this couple singing this really bad 70s pop song.
Yes, I remember that.
You say you love me, and everything is right.
Oh, God, yes, I know. Some awful piece of crap.
Yeah.
Yes, I know. Well, there's a lot of 70s cringe stuff in that series, costume-wise, hair-wise, everything else. But, you know, it was the 70s.
Yep, sure was. David White played Mr. Jameson in the pilot. Do you know why Robert Simon replaced him?
I don't actually know why. I always assumed, because David was great, I always assumed there might have been a health issue. Because I know with Thayer David, who was the bad guy in the pilot, you know, and Thayer was an absolutely marvelous actor, but I knew he was in very poor health, and in fact, he passed away not that long afterwards. And I just always assumed that the same was true with David, because I never quite knew why. I mean, we were lucky to get Robert Simon, because Bob was a marvelous actor, and again, you know, huge list of film credits. And very good in the show. But, you know, I didn't. I just accepted it as something that, you know, it had either been a network decision but I assumed it had to have been something to do with either David didn't want to do the series, he only wanted to do the pilot. I mean, because the others were all there, obviously, you know, Michael Pataki stayed,
right.
You know, and who was a wonderful guy to have. And one of the funniest men I've ever met in my life, Michael Pataki. So he was a joy to have on the show.
Yeah, I liked Robert Simon better because he brought a lot to Mr. Jameson. He wasn't just a cranky curmudgeon. He also could have humanity and even some goofy charm given the right moments.
He could. Well, you see, he was a very good actor. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, which is not to take anything away from David White, but,
right.
You know, Michael Pataki, excellent actor. You know, Bob Jameson. You know, they had some really, really solid actors. And that's what, again, why I was grateful that that's the way CBS wanted to go. They didn't want to fill it with, you know, sort of comedians who be an element of believability to the show.
Mm-hmm. And Chip Fields, she was great.
Chip was lovely, and of course her daughter now. I'm in touch with Kim Fields, and Chip was just lovely. And when you think about it, that was one of the first African American roles of a series regular, where it just kind of was there without any mention being made of it, and any kind of a big deal attached to it. And I think Chip was really glad about that. I think she feels that was kind of, she played a role in helping to kind of, break the perception of different races on regular primetime television.
Oh yeah, I mean there was no mention of race or nothing. It was just just acting, playing a role.
And she never said as a black woman. I mean there was no big deal about that.
Mm-hmm. You guys had so many great character actors on the show. Alan Arbus, Jeffrey Lewis, Nicholas Coster, Lloyd Bachner, even had Ted Danson on the Chinese Web.
Well, yes, Ted came on just for one day, a very small role, but yeah, he was there. We had an amazing cast. Yes, Lloyd Bachner, as you say, one of the great television actors of the 1960s and 70s. So we were very lucky to get them all.
Yeah. How did you handle fame while you were on the show?
When you're doing a series, you are so busy, you don't really have time to think about it. I mean, you're working 17-hour days. And I mean, I never, as I say, what would happen is sort of after you've shot them all, then you kind of, you go to the supermarket and then people recognize you. But while you're actually doing the show, the last thing in the world you're thinking about is, oh, I'm famous now because every Tuesday night at 8 o'clock people are watching me. You're just getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning, going to work, working until 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock at night, and doing that 5-6 days a week. And that's all you think about. So fame wasn't really even an issue. I mean, yeah, obviously, when you're the star of your own primetime series, particularly back then when there were only 3 networks, so everybody was watching CBS, ABC, and NBC. So, I mean, the pilot audience was 37 million. Well, these days, a show is considered a smash hit if it gets 10 million. But, we were the highest rated pilot ever for CBS that year with 37, which is why the series got picked up. And so, of course, you have a profile and people know who you are and they recognize you. But I think because I'd had the experience with The Sound of Music all those years before, and I'd known what it was like to be recognized, I'd known what it was like to be famous and to be in something famous, I just took it in my stride. I kind of knew, oh, okay, well, if this show's a success, that's going to be part of it. Mm-hmm. And, it wasn't that big a deal.
Oh, that's great that you handled it that well.
I did charity functions with people like, Henry Winkler and some of the people from Happy Days. And you think, well, Ronnie Howard, and you think, well, they're handling this in a normal way. They're not acting like. And I remember there was a show called The Dinah Shore Show,
right?
And she had me on, and she had Mark Hamill on, and she had an actress by the name of Susie Blakely.
Oh yeah,
at that time was very, and all 3 of us were the children of military officers, and that's what Dinah Shore found fascinating, is that she thought, what is it about Army kids and Navy kids that make them go into show business and be successful in show business? And I thought that was quite interesting. And so we shared stories about our childhoods, and we realized that we'd all moved a lot. We all knew how to adapt quickly. We all made friends quickly, and we all knew that you have to just kind of plunge into whatever situation you're in really fast. And I think that was kind of the main thing we thought was the kind of the main point between us all.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
But my point in raising that was to say that, there was Mark and there was Susie, and Mark had just done Star Wars, and they're not acting like it's a huge deal. And you think, well, that's right. It's your job. It's what you do. It's your job.
Mm-hmm. Looking at it objectively is what they're doing.
Yeah, you look at it objectively. And then, years later, like, Mark does Comic Cons, and he loves talking to all the people that love Star Wars. Spider-Man, or whether it's Great Big Bomb Trap, or whether it's, Doug Simpson or whatever. I love hearing people say, oh, I was living in such and such a place, and I was 9 years old, or I saw you in this, and it made such an impact. I mean, that's great to hear. It makes you feel great.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What do you think about the newer guys like Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield, who's played Spider-Man?
Yeah, of course. Well, I think they've done a really great job with those movies. I look at those movies and I don't connect to them at all because they're so different from what we did.
Right.
I think they're hugely skillfully done. And, I think Tom Holland was really good as Spider-Man. Andrew Garfield's very good. Look, they're all good. And they're all different in their own way, and they all bring to it their own stuff, which is exactly what it should be and what I think I tried to do.
Yeah, I think the Sam Raimi trilogy is really good. I'm not a big fan of the newer ones. I just think that the digital has gotten out of hand. But
they have become a little too computer heavy. But a lot of those films have now. That's why this last one I just did, it was very nice to work in a film that had no digital stuff in it at all.
Mm-hmm. So after the show ended, you worked a lot in television. You did lots of TV appearances on many shows, and then you moved to Australia to continue working there. What triggered that?
Well, I came out to, actually, it was a weird story. I came out for 2 weeks to visit a friend for a vacation, and while I was here, I got asked to do a mini-series out here that they were doing, but where the lead role was an American guy. And so I did that, and while I was doing that, the network saw what I was doing in that, and then they immediately asked me to do a second one. They did a show about, I don't know if you remember, but years ago at the America's Cup boat race, the Australians won, and for the first time in like 150 years, America lost the cup, and they lost it to the Australians. And the American skipper of the American boat was a guy named Dennis Conner. So they were doing a mini-series called The Challenge about that America's Cup race, and they asked me to play Dennis Conner. So long story short, I did like 4 mini-series, one right after the other, back to back. Then I met the actress who's now my wife, and I decided I really like it here. I can always jump on a plane. I'm only 13 hours away from L.A., and so this just became my base, and I started working here a lot, but also going back to the States to work there as well. So, and I do. I love it here. I love going home. I'll be home in D.C. Next month, and I'll be in Boston in November, and I love being in L.A. When I'm in L.A. I'm American, and I will always be American. But it's a good life out here, and for now it suits me really well.
That's wonderful. So I saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and I think it's the best movie of 2019.
Well, I agree with you, but I'm prejudiced.
How can you be prejudiced?
Well, I'm the biggest member of the Quentin Tarantino fan club in the world. I just think the man is absolutely brilliant. I think he's the great filmmaker of his generation.
I do too.
I think his imagination and his sheer skill, his writing skill. I mean, his dialogue just sings off the page. He's brilliant technically. In conjunction with his cameraman Robert Richardson, they shoot the most beautiful images. And he's an old-fashioned filmmaker. He does nothing digitally. No cell phones allowed on the set. No iPads allowed on the set. No laptops allowed on the set. Everything is done old school. Everything, he shoots using 35mm Panavision film in Panavision cameras, no digital cameras. And, it's old school filmmaking, and I just love it. I absolutely love it.
Yeah.
And I think he gets the results, I think Leo is wonderful in the film. I think Brad is wonderful in the film. And, Brad is saying that now there's going to be a 4-hour Netflix version, which we're all looking forward to because, of course, Quentin gets a little bit excited. He shoots like a 4-hour movie, and then he has to cut it down to a 2.5-hour movie. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of beautiful stuff, a lot of wonderful scenes from everybody that didn't make it into that cut. But I think people who love the movie, if they do the Netflix one, it's not for me to say. I don't know, but I'm just hearing happens, I think there'll be a lot of gems in there people would love.
Mm-hmm. So how did you get cast as Sam Wanamaker?
Through playing Peter Parker. I'm not kidding you. I told you a minute ago that, the Pilot and Deadly Dust and Dragon's Challenge were all released theatrically.
Right.
And, Quentin's got a movie theater in Hollywood called the New Beverly.
Yes.
In which he runs what he thinks are, significant movies. And he had been a fan of my show as a child when he was younger. And so he tracked down he told me this story. He tracked down in England, there was still a guy who had the film cams of the 35 millimeter print that had run in the movie theaters in England of the pilot of The Amazing Spider-Man. He got them all cleaned up. He got them all, he did to them all the stuff they can do now to make them better than they were back in the 70s. And he screened it at his movie theater. And a friend of mine in L.A. said, your pilot is being shown at Quentin Tarantino's movie theater. And I said, that must mean he liked the pilot. So I just happened to mention to my manager around there, I said, look, I heard he's run this. And I said, I had no idea he was making a movie. I said, if he is interested in, that show and, the character I play, I think Quentin Tarantino is fascinating. Please tell him I would be more than happy, to come in and have a cup of coffee and talk to him about it and, have the kind of conversation you and I are having now. And so my manager did pass that on to his casting director or whoever it was. And lo and behold, about a month later, we got a phone call saying Quentin would love to meet me and could I come to his office. And I went to his office, again, thinking all we're going to do is talk about Spider-Man, but that's cool. I get to have an hour with Quentin Tarantino. And I walked in, and that's what we did. We talked about Spider-Man a bit, and then we talked about the 70s, and we talked about the 60s, and we talked about movies, and turned out we had a lot of the same people we liked from those days, and, actors like Richard Jekyll and Claude Akins, and, Struther Martin, and all these actors I'd worked with. And he knew I'd been on Gunsmoke, and he knew I'd been on a number of westerns back then. And he said, did you ever hear of a western called Lancer? And I said, not really. And he said, well, it was written and directed by Sam Wanamaker. And I said, I know who Sam Wanamaker is. He's the guy who started the Globe Theatre in England. And
right.
He was a very good actor and very good director. And he said, yeah, well, he directed this pilot. And I said, that's interesting. And then, so we talked a bit about some other stuff. And then as I was leaving, he reached in the drawer and he handed me a DVD. And he said, this is the pilot to Lancer that Wanamaker directed. He said, well, why don't you just have a look at it and tell me what you think? So I thought, and I was flying back to Australia that night. So I'm in the car on the way to the airport, and I called my manager, and I said, well, this is really fascinating. I had a great time, and I said, but for some reason I don't quite understand, he gave me this DVD of a pilot called Lancer. And my manager said, that's because you've just been offered the role of Sam Wanamaker. So, it came totally out of the blue. And in the best possible way, because, I wasn't going in trying to impress him. I wasn't going in thinking, what does he want? I didn't know he was making a movie.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was great. It was great. So to answer your question, that's how I got the part.
Wow.
I mean, it was based on, obviously, just the conversation we had, and I think he just thought, well, age-wise and looks-wise and everything else, I'm somebody that, he thought would be right for this. And, of course, I just had the most wonderful time of my life. I just loved it. I loved every single second.
Oh, that's great. Did you...
I never wanted that job to end.
Yeah, I can imagine. Did you research through Sam Wanamaker's daughter?
I not through the daughter. I didn't contact Zoe. I had some friends who know Zoe. I was a bit concerned, and I thought, I hope she doesn't disapprove of the way we're depicting him. I mean, because there are a lot of scenes that you don't see between Leo and me, in which Sam is really going full bore as director. And, as Leo's character is having difficulty, with his confidence and with getting the role right, there are a lot of scenes of the director urging him and giving him tips and giving him notes and giving him ideas. And, we shot all those. And I think they're quite interesting for anybody who would like to see how a director and an actor work together. But what I did research, and the studio gave me these, Quentin's office gave me a lot of DVDs of performances of Wanamaker in shows he'd been in as an actor. Mm-hmm. So I could see what he was like as a person, and I could sort of see what his personality was like. And I saw he was quite theatrical. He was a bit larger than life, very full on, high energy, and so those were the kind of elements that we took into it. Mm-hmm. And in fact, one of these little Quentin Tarantino Easter eggs that he's always putting in, Sam Wanamaker did a film with Richard Dreyfuss and Amy Irving called The Competition, in which he played an orchestra conductor. And the outfit he wears in the competition, in rehearsal, we duplicate virtually identically in the outfit I wear directing Lancer, which is the sweater over the shoulders, the cream turtleneck, the tight pants. We tried to, as close as we could. So in other words, it's not the way Sam Wanamaker would have been in real life, but it's the way Sam Wanamaker was as that character, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, he's just...
And that's what, because that, Quentin loved that character that he played in that film. And the character is this kind of, again, he's a big, larger-than-life, very, very kind of vital, filled with vitality kind of conductor, not composer, conductor, orchestra conductor. And that's what Quentin wanted. He wanted that kind of a feel to it. So I'm dying to know if Zoe's seen the film, and if she has, I hope to God she likes it, because I would hate to think that in some ways she felt I had dishonored her father, because I'm an enormous admirer of Wanamaker's. I think what he did was extraordinary. He practically single-handedly got the money raised to build the Globe Theatre in London, which never would have happened without him. And in fact, they've now named the small theatre at the Globe, they've named it the Wanamaker Theatre. So, he made his mark, and he was a very good actor, he was a good writer, and he was a good director. So he had a very solid career.
And he was on Joseph McCarthy's blacklist.
Well, that's why he moved to London.
Yeah.
That's why he lived for so many years in England, is because he refused to tell and to hand his friends over and betray them and claim they were communists. So he was a decent and ethical man on top of everything else. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. And most people don't really know his story anymore. I mean, when
Sad.
You talk to people about Wanamaker today, I'm sure most people watching Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, if they're under the age of 30 or 35, they probably think I'm just playing some fictitious character.
Yeah.
They probably don't realize that that's all actually true. Wanamaker did write Lancer. He did direct Lancer. And he would have hired Joe Don Baker, which is the character Leo's playing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when he says, I didn't hire you to be a TV cowboy, I hired you to be an actor. Well, that is exactly probably the kind of thing he would have said to Joe Don Baker, who just kind of played a lot of just run-of-the-mill bad guys. Yep. But actually, in the pilot to Lancer, which I have, Joe Don Baker's performance is excellent. Mm-hmm. And probably largely helped by Wanamaker.
Mm-hmm. Well, very underrated actor.
Well,
yeah.
Tommy, I've spoken to you for so long. Your audience is going to be bored to death.
They want to hear you, not me. Yeah, they want to hear you, not me. I wanted to ask you really quickly. Is that how you remember Hollywood in 1969?
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. In fact, so many details on that show, like the arc lights we used, what the trailers looked like that the actors stay in. So many of the details reminded me, well, particularly of working on Gunsmoke. You know, I did several episodes of Gunsmoke, and when we were on that Lancer set with the horses and the cowboys and the saloon and the dusty street and the stagecoaches, you know, I just feel like I've time traveled back to my very early jobs in the early 70s in L.A.,
Yeah.
working on Dirty Sally and Oregon Trail and Gunsmoke and Alias Smith and Jones and all the westerns that we all used to do back then.
Mm-hmm. So you said
I never worked out at Spawn Ranch, I must say, and now I'm kind of sorry I never did, because given the notoriety of Spawn Ranch now, we used to go out to Lone Pine, California, and we used to go to Tucson to shoot a lot of our location stuff. But I think by the time I was working, Spawn was already pretty run down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a landmark, certainly.
Mm.
So
For all the worst reasons.
For all the worst reasons, exactly. You mentioned you're going to be at MegaFest in November in Boston. Do you have any other appearances or even any projects you want to bring up?
I don't have any scheduled right now. I'm hoping to do one in London because I'd love to go over and see the English fans again. They're always so great. And also, I believe there's one in Tokyo. But those aren't set in stone yet, but I'm really hoping I can. Yeah, MegaFest is, I think it's the weekend of like the 16th and 17th of November. It's actually just outside of Boston in a place called Framingham, but I'm sure most people will just come from Boston. And I'm really looking forward to it. I very rarely do these things, but when I do, I always have a great time.
I hope they invite you to California.
I'm doing a dinner actually there too. I'm doing a dinner that I don't really understand it, but I'm sure it's all on the website. But it's like a VIP dinner that if people want to buy a ticket and come to the dinner, and then it's just a one-on-one with me, and we all sit and have a meal together, which could be really fun too.
Oh, yeah. I hope they invite you to California. I would love to meet you at a California convention.
Well, I would love to too. I know there's one that's done in Silicon Valley. I would love to do that, and of course, you know, I know there's a big one in San Diego. So I'll let you know if any of that happens.
Oh, that would be wonderful. I mean, you were such a magnificent guest today, and I thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much, Tommy. Well, good. Thank you for pursuing me, tracking me down, and good luck with the podcast. And I hope it goes well.
My pleasure, sir. You were just spectacular. Thank you, and have yourself a great day over there in Australia.
Thank you very much. All the best to you.
Thank you, sir. Bye-bye. Well, there you have it. Nicholas Hammond. Ain't he a cool dude? A true gentleman and class act with wisdom of old Hollywood. I am so blessed and honored to have interviewed this man. Great last September show before Halloween October begins tomorrow on Splat from the Past. And all you out there listening are going to be happy about that once you see the shows starting tomorrow. Thank you so much, Nicholas. If you like this video, everyone, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Add me as a friend on Facebook. Join my Tommy Kovac comedian page on Facebook. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram and all that fun stuff. Well, that's all the time we have this week on Splat from the Past. Until next time, this is Tommy Throwback Kovac saying, there's no shame in living in the past, because the present sucks. Later, dudes!